Well, thank you. I forgot to mention I'm also a notary republic. I think we should put that in there. Anyway, I'm glad to be here. It's customary for speakers to be glad to be where the meeting is being held. And I forgot to mention also in my vast experience, I've had the opportunity to speak in front of 4 presidents of the United States. Unfortunately, it was Mount Rushmore, but you have to start somewhere. But I'll try not to be like that preacher who got sick and this Obamacare nurse made a mistake and put a barometer down his throat instead of a thermometer, and the reading came out windy and dry. So you just never know. But we're going to try to communicate in plain English. I had a patient in last week. He said, "Doctor, tell me in plain English what's wrong with me. I don't want any of those scientific terms." I said, "You're fat and lazy." He said, "Now use scientific terms so I can tell my wife." See, so sometimes it's how you say things. Tell your wife she looks like a fresh breath of spring, not the end of a cold, hard winter, you know. A woman said to Yogi Berra once, "You're looking pretty cool today." He said, "You don't look so hot yourself." So it's how you say it, see, that makes a lot of the difference. Well, we live in the land of opportunity. There's more opportunity today than there ever has been in the history of the human race. In fact, sometimes I feel like the mosquito who flew into the nudist camp, and he surveyed the situation and he said, "The opportunities here are so vast I hardly know where to start," you know, so you just never know. It's like and these politicians, there's nothing confuses a political statement more than its clarification. For instance, it's like one senator back in the days of Prohibition. A reporter asked him, "Senator, how do you stand on the whiskey scandal?" He said, "Sir, I'm not prepared to talk about anything controversial, but I don't believe in sidestepping any issue." He said, "Sir, if what you mean when you say whiskey, you mean that devil's brew that topples the Christian man out of the righteousness into the bottomless pits of despair and helplessness and hopelessness and shame, if you mean that poison scourge," he said, "that causes divorce and benevolent institutions, the ruination of the country, I will do everything I can to stop it." Now, on the other hand, he said, if what you mean when you say whiskey, if you mean that oil of conversation, if you mean that medicinal spirit that enables the poor man to forget, if even for a moment, the problems and heartaches and tribulations he has to face in life, if that's what you mean, I will do everything I can to protect it. He said, "Sir, now that I've answered your inquiry without equivocation, I feel in good conscience you should put in your paper, I'm a man of my conviction. This is my stand. There is no compromise. This is my stand." Well, see, we got a lot of politicians like that. They change sides more often than a windshield wiper. So you don't know where they're at on any area. And I've kind of titled this talk, "The Lunatics Are Trying to Take Over the Asylum." It's like the one guy who was head of a mental institution. He went to a restaurant. He said, "We got about 25 people we think are well. We'd like to test them out in the real world, send them to your restaurant, go out for a meal, and have you observe them, see if you notice anything abnormal." He said, "How much will it run?" He said, "Oh, I do it for $400. He said, "Well, that's very reasonable for this many people, a nice meal with dessert and wine." So he said, "Now, when they pay for their meal, they'll all pay you in bottle tops. You just accept that as full payment, and I'll set you up in the morning." Well, the next morning he met with him at the hotel, with the restaurant guy. He said, "How'd things go?" He said, "It was wonderful. They were laughing and joking, having a good time. I didn't see anything abnormal at all. It was hilarious, though. Every one of them paid me in bottle tops. Our staff was all watching that. We thought that was so funny." He said, "Okay, how much I owe you?" He said, $400, just like we said. And the guy said, "Well, do you have any change for a manhole cover?" So you just never know who's the lunatic nowadays. So anyway, we're going to take a few words about politics. The word poly means many, and ticks, of course, are those things that suck blood out of you. So we got to always look at what the incentive is, where the incentive is. It's like one guy who was dying, and they called in his son, who was his only heir. And he said, "Son, I left everything to you in the will." He said, "The boat, the yacht, the airplane, the $1 million in foreign security, the 1,000-acre farm, it's all yours right there in the will." And he started fading rapidly, and he leaned over and said, "Father, is there anything I can do for you?" He said, "Get your foot off the oxygen hose." So you got to look at where the incentive is, see. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, "Honk if you believe in anything." I mean, that's the way it's getting today. We don't know what people believe about anything. Well, anyway, I'm one of these old angry white guys, the white sheep in the family. And where times are so difficult, if Alice came to America, she'd think she never left Wonderland. I mean, just the way the country is going. Politics may not be the oldest profession, but it sure does have its similarities. It's kind of like Columbus, who went and he didn't know where he's going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he came back, he didn't know where he had been. And he did it all on borrowed money. I mean, that's kind of the way Congress is today. Congress has two chambers, Sodom and Gomorrah. Anyway, and politics is starting to give sex a bad name. I mean, it's getting rough. I went to my first X-rated Western the other day. Even the wagons weren't covered. I mean, it's getting rough. Well, anyway, even Winston Churchill said it's hard to solve all the world's problems in an after-dinner speech. And one evangelist once, he said, "How long does it take to do an evangelistic crusade?" He said, "At least 3 weeks. I preach the first 2 weeks to preach them into hell, and the last week to preach them out. They appreciate it." So that's about what it takes nowadays. And so when I ran for office the one time, a guy walked up to me and said, "I wouldn't vote for you if you were St. Peter." I said, "Well, if I was St. Peter, I wouldn't need your vote because you wouldn't be in my district." So a bigot is a conservative winning an argument against a liberal. See, so that's how you define what a bigot is. In the world of the insane, normal people are considered nuts. And that's kind of the way the country is going. Anyway, my last speech, I almost got a standing ovation. A guy jumped to his feet in the front row, and here was a midget. Nobody saw him. It's just my story of my life. Anyway, we're going to say a few words about Sleepy Joe here. He said, "I'm running because of my age and experience." Now, wisdom is supposed to come with old age. But in his case, age came all alone. He said, "I believe in facts rather than the truth." Facts rather than the truth. You know, these are real statements by him. And he said, "It's all about around-the-clock sex." Now, he's always had a little trouble with the truth. He said he graduated in the top half of his class, but when you check the records, he was 78th out of 87. And on passing Obamacare, which took 1/5 of our economy at midnight on a party line vote, he said, "This is a big blankety-blank deal with the hot mic." And he said, it was even if we do everything right, there's a 30% chance we got it all wrong. So how'd you be on an airplane? The pilot says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we got a 30% chance this plane's going down." Would you want to stay on the plane? And he said, "Our number one agenda is three 4-letter words: jobs, jobs, jobs." He said, "The largest growth in population, you can't go into a 7-Eleven unless you have a Mexican or Indian accent." So he said, Roosevelt said, "Walk softly and carry a big stick." And he says, "I promise you, the president has a big stick." Unbelievable. Now he said, "I want to be clear, I'm not going nuts." When he said, "What's it like not to like Vermont," when he was in New Hampshire? He never knows where he's at. And then he said, "The poor kids are just as bright as white kids." And then he said, "I've known 8 presidents, 3 of them intimately." So he didn't clarify that, but Barack Hussein Obama is the first African-American president, first African-American who is articulate, bright, and clean, he said. And to a paralyzed state senator at an event, he said, "Stand up, Chuck, and greet the people." He forgot that he couldn't stand. He said FDR went on TV, fraudulent deficit Roosevelt. He went on TV in 1929. Of course, TV hadn't been invented yet. And he said, he said to the audience, "You look dull as hell." He said that to the audience, so he should have read How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, ladies and gentlemen, and other genders. So a reporter asked him, how many genders are there? He said, at least 3. He said, what's the other one? He said, don't play games with me. On CNN prime time, he said, the people need to go to Joe 30330, and that website was bought up by Buttigieg the next day. Gave the wrong address. So, but Biden has a clean mind. He changes it more often than a windshield wiper. He's right up to date. He said it's time parents go home and play their record players. On gun control, he said it's absolutely mindless that we have guys with guns with multiple bullets in them. That's mindless. It's kind of like Jocelyn Elder. She said, what we really need is safer bullets. I mean, it's just unbelievable what they come up with. So anyway, now Pocahontas, she's 1250th Indian. I said my kids are part Indian. Every time I tell them to do something, they say, how? Anyway. When I was a kid, we always played cowboys and Indians. I was always the Indian, even had my own casino. But 54 trillion for her health plan. That's 10,000 for every man, woman, and child in America, not counting illegal immigrants. 54 trillion. Now, the Green New Deal, which is the old communist red, that's 100 trillion. Now, if you add up the economies, there's 195 nations in the world. If you add up the total economy of all 195 nations, it comes to 77 trillion. So just on these 2 issues, they want twice the money that the entire world makes so they can save the planet. Unbelievable. Now, here's the problem with the health care bill. This is actually Medicare for all, which is Medicare for none. Here's what Medicare actually says. Medicare Guidelines, section 2251.3. A treatment plan that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, prolong and enhance the quality of life, or therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is deemed not medically necessary. So if you want to feel better, forget that. So they'll pay to cut your leg off if you got diabetic neuropathy. Won't pay a nickel to save it. So a treatment plan to prevent disease or promote health, not medically necessary to see a doctor. So Big Pharma spends $1 million per politician. So guess what they pay for? Drugs. Our whole healthcare system is designed to treat acute pain. You cannot treat acute pain, chronic problems. 80% of the people have chronic problems. You can't treat a chronic problem with acute procedures. That's the problem. So the entire economy will go down the drain. Vladimir Lenin said socialized medicine is the cornerstone of communism. It's the only surefire way known to control the people. Because now people are wards of the state, doctors are slaves of the state. They're going to pay doctors Medicare rates, which is 40% less, and they're going to work longer hours. Now, how many of you in this room, no matter what you do for a living, would like to work longer hours for 40% of cut and pay? Don't worry, doctors will do it. Well, where are you going to find a doctor? And so Medicare cost 9 times more than projected estimates when it was first passed. 9 times more. So if her health care program costs 9 times more, because all these numbers, I took time off work once and heard an Obamacare nurse explaining the whole program, and she had the blackboard all full with numbers and explaining it. After her 3-hour lecture, I raised my hand. I said, these numbers are really impressive that you put together. I said, my question is this. The aged, the handicapped, the disabled, people with chronic pain, people with expensive ailments, who determines how much care they get? Well, you know, she said, we have limited resources. So if they can justify killing babies all the way to the moment of delivery for the crime of being inconvenient, who else is inconvenient? The aged, the handicapped, the disabled, people with chronic pain, people with expensive ailments. Just get rid of them. Hitler killed 180,000 before he ever started with the Jews. And when you're a ward of the state, it's hard to fight for liberty when you're old, sick, and poor. So all citizens become property of the state. Remember when they said, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. Your premiums are going to go down $2,500. The exact opposite happened. Hitler said you tell a big lie loud enough, long enough, and enough time, the Gulf people will buy it. And so it was passed along party line vote. The opposite happens. Now, socialism only works two places, heaven where they don't need it, and hell where they already got it. And so I've been to Russia. I went through the Russian hospitals. I was the first American ever in these hospitals. My son played basketball against the Russians, and I got a tour, and I got it on my website. In fact, you can go to alanunruh.com and see my tour of the Russian hospitals. It's a shocker. They pay $3 per person per year for health care, I think it is. And so they asked Trump why he doesn't like socialism. And he said, well, in America, we like to walk our dogs, not eat them. Big difference. And anyway, in Venezuela, they're eating rats and whatever they can get a hold of, anything that pink flamingos for Thanksgiving coming up. That's Venezuela. 4 million people trying to leave. They confiscate the guns, so they have no way to defend themselves. So anyway, they pay the doctor Medicare rates, no problem. There's 300,000 doctors shortage right now in America. So what do you think it will be if half the doctors, you wait in line. I got a patient who fixes MRIs in Canada, and he was there for about 3 days. They're fixing the MRIs, and they said, well, we'll see you tomorrow. He said, oh, no, we're done for the month. What do you mean? Well, the country can only afford so many a month. We've already done them. So the other people just have to wait in line. So one woman who had a brain problem with dizziness. They said you couldn't get an MRI for 6 months, so she came to America and paid $5,000 cash for it, got it within a couple of days, had a fast-growing brain tumor. She went back to get the surgery. They said, oh, no, you got to wait 6 months. This is socialism. You can't jump the line. Well, she said, I'll be dead in 6 months. So we're a safety net. Basically, they have to sell their house, everything they own, just to come here to survive. So we're the safety net. So when we go, what's it going to be like? So when they spend $1 million per politician, basically follow the money. We have 5% of the world's population. We consume 80% of all the drugs in the world. So we're not healthier. So we're actually a drug-addicted society. Any type of symptom that you have, drug it, stop the pain, but there's 4 pages of side effects to every painkiller. They're the worst ones to take. Second biggest killer, drug reactions. So when you watch the Lyrica commercial, 90% of the commercial is disclaimers, and half of them are lethal. So it might kill you, but take it anyway. If you got constant thoughts of suicide, talk to your doctor before you jump off the bridge. Now there's Crazy Bernie. He said, Pocahontas said she's a capitalist. I'm a true socialist. Open borders for all. Everybody in the world can come here, and they get free health care, free education, free housing, free food, everything's free. Well, there's always free cheese in a mousetrap. Along with shekels come shackles. And Bernie said the Boston bomber, who killed several people and maimed another 200, he should have the sacred right to vote. Should not lose, no matter how bad or how evil, they should keep the sacred right to vote. That's why they're against capital punishment. They need the votes. And so you wonder, where's the sanity in the radical left today? I mean, it's getting to the point where the only hope for the Republicans is the Democrats. Because you don't know what they're going to say next. He took his honeymoon in Russia, and he said the economy is great there. Of course, it collapsed about a month later after his honeymoon, completely collapsed. See, a socialist likes what he doesn't have so much, he doesn't want you to have it either. The difference between a socialist and a vulture is a vulture at least waits till you're dead before he eats your heart out. And anyway, my kid one time, he said, I need $50. I said, all I got's 40. He said, you can owe me 10. I mean, it's just, it used to be give me liberty or give me death. Now it's just give me, see. So times have changed. The wisdom of the ages, there ain't no free lunch. In one sentence, there ain't no free lunch. Somebody has to pay. Anytime somebody gets something he didn't work for, someone else had to work for something he didn't get. That's all there is to it. So you can't help the weak, by destroying the strong. You can't help the poor by tearing down the rich. You can't help people permanently by doing for them and what they could and should do for themselves. Now, if you think government is going to provide security and happiness and peace, all we have to do is look at the reservation in South Dakota, and you'll see what happens when you get government aid. So whatever the government taxes decreases, whatever they subsidize increases. So if they tax hard work and labor and savings and investment, you have less of it. If you subsidize laziness and irresponsibility, you get more of it. Those are just basic principles. So we have war on poverty. Since the Johnson administration, we spent $22 trillion on the war on poverty. We got more poor. Now, I'll let Bernie know that I'm reading a book on the Pilgrims. There was a time in America where 99.5% of all the people were poor. This country wasn't settled by rich people. Some indentured themselves into slavery to get third-class steerage on a sailboat. They came here with nothing. And someone said the first 9,000 people that came here, half of them starved to death. Governor Bradford's wife starved to death the next day, died on the boat. He read the parable of the talents because they were starving, and they divided everything in common, but he read the parable of the talents. If you use your God-given talent, God will give you another one. If you use 5 talents, he'll give you 5 more. So he decided to give everyone a plot of land. Whatever you grow on your own land, you get to keep. Wow, we get to keep the fruits of our own labor? What a novel idea. It provided the principles of Christianity because they came here for one reason, to worship God without being slaughtered. And principles of Christianity with free enterprise. And up to 20,000 in a day were killed in the days of John Knox for their faith. There was only one place to go, and that's that land Columbus discovered. There's only been 6,000 years of world history, of recorded history, since the beginning of man. So if all of us live to be 100 years old, that's only 60 lifetimes. So you stop and think about that. 60 lifetimes. Now, if someone invented a time machine to compress those 6,000 years into 24 hours, it would mean we've only been a country for 3.5 seconds. But in those 3.5 seconds, over 50% of all the wealth in the entire world occurred here. 90% of all mankind's inventions and discoveries occurred here. Now, what's different about America that in 200 years, we've accomplished more than the previous 6,000 years of mankind? Well, we're the only nation built on a creed. One nation under God. We're the only nation built on an ideal and an idea. And when Obama was elected, they said, you believe in American exceptionalism. Well, like European exceptionalism, like France exceptionalism, nothing special about America. But capitalism, combined with Christianity, created the highest standard of living the world has ever dreamed of. I mean, I'm a young whippersnapper. I still remember in my lifetime when we put indoor plumbing in our house. And some of our relatives got it a year later. I think it was, but I can still remember that. Our bathroom caught on fire. Luckily, we put it out before it reached the house. Used to play kick the can, now it's kick the habit, see. The only bad thing on TV was the reception. That was kind of snowy, see. Anyway, so here we are, starting with nothing. They took the electricity out of the clouds, the oil out of the rock, lumen out of the clay. They had rivers to be bridged and cities to be built and mountains to be trailed. We created the greatest land the world's ever dreamed of in the history of the world. Now, why is it if we're a racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic, Islamophobic country, people from 140 nations can't wait to come here? But are they being assimilated into Americanism, our faith, Christianity, where our rights come from God, not government? Not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of Almighty God. Our Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. When I speak at universities, I say, what does unalienable mean? Not one college kid ever knows what that word means. Unalienable means God-given rights. They're not given to us by government, by the Supreme Court, by any elected person. These are God-given rights. They're inherent. They're inviolate. The right to life. Nobody can take it from you. Liberty. What is liberty? You know what the biggest threat to liberty is? The biggest threat to liberty is liberty. Samuel Adams and James Madison argued, or John Adams said, if we let people govern themselves, they could rape, rob, and murder each other. And John Adams said, yes, freedom without virtue is madness. You can't have liberty without virtue. You can't have virtue without God. 98% in 1776 believed in the God of the Bible. 27 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence had seminary degrees. They all feared God, and our whole Constitution was written on that premise. If we ever become a nation that's not under God, we'll be a nation gone under, said Ronald Reagan. And so, anyway, and then you get to the squad, what I call the four horsewomen of the apocalypse. They're always wrong, but never in doubt. They have their feet planted firmly in midair. Deep down, they're really shallow. Anyway, they are ignoramuses and not one bit modest about it. Einstein said the difference between stupidity and genius is that genius has its limitations. He said there's only two things that are infinite in the world, stupidity and the universe, and I'm not so sure about the universe. So anyway, if stupidity were energy, I think these four could light up the world. Think about that one. Their philosophy is we have to destroy America to save it. People who believe their absurdities are willing to commit atrocities. So we got a 29-year-old bartender telling us the sky's going to fall if we don't listen to her so she can save the earth. And twice the income of the entire world, we got to give that to her. Now, I read about a guy who invented a drink called urban renewal. 2 of those and the whole landscape looks better. Now, I think she should just have a couple of those and get it over with, because that's about as far as their wisdom goes. Their philosophy is you can't convince them, confuse them. Now, how did we ever get here in the first place? How did this country, built one nation under God, ever reject the very things? See, history of the world goes from living in bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to supernatural courage, from supernatural courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to complacency, from complacency to apathy, and from apathy back to bondage. Abraham Lincoln said, if America ever fails, it'll be because we've committed national suicide from within. Now, a world philosopher named Hegel said there's no God in the early 1800s. Why, we're all God. God is a figment of your imagination. There is no such thing as God. Well, Feuerbach come along and said if there's no God, that means there's no truth. Why? Truth is based on public opinion. If what's wrong for you might be right for me, all I have to do is think it's right. And what was wrong yesterday might be a right today if enough people think it's okay. So in other words, there's no such thing as absolute truth. Everyone has their own truth. Of course, Darwin comes along and says if there's no God and there's no truth, where did we come from? Well, we must have evolved from the slime. The earth fell off the sun 93 million miles and then stopped, tipped at a 37-degree angle to give us the 4 seasons. Oxygen 21%, hydrogen 78%, just the right percentage to sustain life. It all just happened. That's like a tornado going through a junkyard, and out comes a 747. I mean, it's what I call paralysis of the analysis. They are educated beyond their intelligence. They have what's known as constipation of the cerebrum. Well, if there's no God, no truth, we came from the slime. Karl Marx comes along. He read Hegel. He was a student of Hegel and Feuerbach. He said all there is materialism. It's not fair that some have more than others. Without God, it's just not right. Over 100 million people got slaughtered because of his philosophy with the Communist Manifesto. A college student at USD said, Dr. Unruh, I believe from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. What are your thoughts on that? I said, well, Karl Marx said that. 100 million got slaughtered because of his philosophy. I said he drank blood every week. He worshiped the devil. He dedicated his book to Lucifer. 6 people went to his funeral. He was a madman. What is it about him that inspires you? And she didn't know what to say. They don't have a clue. Sigmund Freud comes along after no God, no truth. And then we come from the slime. What's the purpose of life? Well, it's sexual gratification. That's the only reason we exist. We're all animals anyway. Anything goes. So we dismantled all the laws that gave moral restraints when it comes to sexuality. And politics follows culture. So they started teaching the philosophy of all these 4 or 5 people from the grave in every one of our universities. And they accept this as fact. Well, free love, free sex, the sexual revolution in the 60s, that's what came about from Alfred Kinsey, who was a sadomasochist, homosexual pedophile. Nobody questioned where he got his research. But that is still taught in all of our universities. Now, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and it doesn't say happiness. The pursuit of happiness. The government's not supposed to hand it to you on your lap. And what is happiness? During the days of Ronald Reagan, I heard him once speak in Washington. He said they formed a demography of happiness. If we have the right to be happy, what causes happiness? So they formed a committee to study it. Well, they found out that young people were happier than old people. Well people were happier than sick people. And wealthy people were happier than poor people. They spent $1 million to find out it's better to be young, rich, and healthy than old, sick, and poor. So anyway, you know, when George Washington fought the Revolutionary War, he won the war by losing 75% of the battles. If they took a poll and says, how many of you want to fight the largest army in the world and outnumbered 100 to 1 with some muskets and pea shooters? I mean, 75% didn't want to fight the Revolutionary War, and out of the 25% who did, only 5% actually fought. He lost more men to disease, starvation, and freezing to death than he ever lost in battle. We got 4 presidents on Mount Rushmore. George Washington, who says, the fate of unborn millions will depend under God on the courage and success of this army. He said it's impossible to govern without God and the Bible. Jefferson said the first duty of government is to protect innocent human life. It's the only legitimate function of good government. See, the role of government is to be a watchdog to be fed, not a cow to be milked. They've changed the whole role of what government's here for. If men were angels, we wouldn't need government. They knew the sinful nature of man. That's why they put checks and balances. And Abe Lincoln said, nobody should have the freedom to choose to do what's morally wrong. He said, can we think the liberties of a nation be secure when we've forgot the basic foundation, which is faith in the Almighty God, our Creator? Teddy Roosevelt said, we have the choice now between preserving our Christian heritage and values or reverting back to barbaric paganism. That's what Roosevelt said. 4 people on Mount Rushmore. James Madison, he said, liberty without virtue is madness. Now, James Madison said, it does little avail to the American people if laws are written that are so voluminous nobody can read them. They're so incoherent nobody can understand them. They're altered and modified before they're promulgated and subject to interpretation so nobody can know what the law meant yesterday, what it means today, or what it means tomorrow. That's why this document here, everybody can read it in 15 minutes. And it's written in a language you can understand. Let me just read to you the tax code, which is now, I got it on 1/2 of a page there. The entire tax code. 3% of the people paid. 97% never paid tax. Here's one paragraph I'm going to read. It's 57 feet high, 9 million words, 75,000 pages. How many of you read it? Einstein said the hardest thing, the most difficult thing anybody could ever understand is the income tax. I'm going to read this one sentence of the income tax, and if you can understand this one sentence, you know the code. For purposes of paragraph 3, an organization described in paragraph 2 shall be deemed to include an organization described in section 501C-4 or 6, which would be described in 2 if it were an organization described in section 501(3-C. Got that? That's one sentence of the tax code. Now guess what? Obamacare's written the same way. Not one person in Congress read Obamacare. 2,700 pages. Congressman Conyers said, why would I read it? I'd have to hire a team of lawyers to explain it to me. What good would that do? Supreme Court said, why would we read this? That would be cruel and unusual punishment. So they take over 1/5 of the economy, not one person read it, and they own you on a party line vote. Now, if that's not tyranny, I don't know what is. Now, the Declaration of Independence, I rewrote the Declaration of Independence according to the current liberal philosophy. If Congress had to write, the liberals in Congress, the leftists, wrote the Declaration of Independence, here's what they would say, the Unruh version. We hold the following suggestions and ideas to be possible as long as no one takes offense or objects. In which case, we will find a more politically correct, non-offensive way to express what we think might be good ideas for a new nation. Would you give your life for that philosophy? I don't think so. If you can't convince them, confuse them. I mean, what does the left come up with? A few years back, pay toilets. People didn't have the money, and then they finally realized when nature calls, it shouldn't be collect. Feminists put urinals in women's bathrooms, but most women wouldn't stand for it. So now they want to outlaw urinals in New York. You never know what they're going to come up with for solutions to problems. So anyway, there's pivotal moments in our country's history. Today we're celebrating the wall coming down. Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. All the elitists says, you cannot say that, Mr. President. That will be so offensive to the Russians. You think about Ronald Reagan, when the bullet hit him, it missed his heart by 1/8 of an inch. He lost half his blood. Only by the providence of God that he lived. And he said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And the wall came down because of a man with courage. And Colonel Powell, some of them, you can't say that. And his best friend said, give your speech, Mr. President. You got elected, they didn't. He said, I think I will. I mean, you think about the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg. One general got shot 6 times, 4 horses shot out from under him. He said, we're going to charge. They were outnumbered 6-1, and the South ran. They thought they got to have reinforcements. And they won that battle. Had they not done it, we'd be 2 nations right now. Abraham Lincoln won by the Electoral College. He lost the popular vote. We'd be 2 nations right now had not Abraham Lincoln won that election. John Quincy Adams was the only president that ran for Congress after he was elected, after he was out of office. Imagine Bill Clinton running for Congress, or George Bush running for Congress. And they said, what are you doing this for? He said, so they censured him because he ran on one issue, and that was slavery. Why are you doing this? He said, duty is ours, the results are God's. Duty is ours, the results are God's. It was Christianity with people with courage that eliminated slavery. Pivotal moments in history. Well, you know, I read in Chicago there's an ice packing plant that got burned down years ago, and the caption in the newspaper said there were 27 tons of ice in this plant burned down, and said this building had all the material inside of it capable of putting out the fire, but it was in unavailable form. It was frozen assets. And you know, we've got all the assets to save this country. It just takes a few people with courage. In times of moral crisis, silence isn't golden, it's yellow. We need preachers to preach. We need another great awakening like George Whitefield, who said, I will not be a velvet-mouthed preacher. He said an actor's job, he understood theatrics, he said an actor's job is to portray things that are not real as though they're real. A preacher's job, too many preachers preach about things that are real as if it's just imaginary. So we need to have the courage of our convictions that transform people's lives, because our problems in America are spiritual and not economic, anything else. That's why totalitarian governments, when King George killed all these people and Bloody Mary, all the Christianity that were persecuted, they can't stand anybody worshiping a higher authority than them. In China, if you belong to any religion, whether it's Muslim, Hindu, Christian, anyone who worships a higher authority than the king, they've got him in slave labor. And the battle lines are drawn against Christianity in America the same way. So we need to take a stand and be counted. So I'm just going to finish with a brief story. I'm circling the field now, which means I may not land right away, but I could come in any time. The night before Paul Revere's ride, John Hancock and Samuel Adams met at Jonas Clark's house. Jonas Clark was the town preacher in a little town of Lexington. Everybody went to his church. He was the most respected man in town, the only one with a college education. Anyway, Samuel Adams, or John Hancock, could finance the war. He was very wealthy. Samuel Adams didn't have any money, but he was a fireball. He said, if ye love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude better than the animated contest of freedom, go from us in peace. We ask not your counsel nor your arms. May your chains set lightly upon you. May you lick the hands that feed you. And may posterity forget that you were our countrymen. These guys were smart. But he asked, if it comes to war, do you think the people will fight? And Jonas Clark, the preacher, jumped up. He said, I know they'll fight, because I prepared them just for that. I know they'll fight. Well, the next day, the British rode up on their horse. They said, put down your arms, ye rebels. Put down your arms, ye tyrants, in the name of the sovereign King of England. And Samuel Adams said, we consider nobody sovereign but Almighty God, and nobody king but King Jesus. They said, don't shoot unless fired upon, but if it means war, let it begin here. And when several parishioners lay dead in the church parking lot, they said, let this be known as the day freedom starts around the world, and it became known as the shot heard around the world. But the rest of the story, it started in a church parking lot with a country church and a country preacher. The British blamed the Revolutionary War on the Black Robe Regiment. Who was the Black Robe Regiment? The country preachers in small towns all across America that preached in their black robes. Pastor Marlenberg, he preached from Ecclesiastics. There's a time to laugh, a time to cry, a time to live, a time to die. There's a time for peace and a time for war. And he took off his black robe. He said he was fully dressed in military uniform. He said, ladies and gentlemen, we happen to be living in a time for war. All the men who want to fight for liberty follow me. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. 300 men followed him out. And they formed Minutemen. Churches all across America formed Minutemen that would fight the British at a minute's notice. That's the only solution, is the church. Waking the town, tell the people. Herbert Hoover once said, we're treating symptoms instead of causes in this country. We're expecting things to come out of our people that have never been put in there. And we've got to start home by home, community by community, organization by organization, and instill back into our people those reliable traits of character and responsibility upon which this country was founded. This is just a piece of paper. How many own one? How many read it? Unless the principles are in the hearts of every person, it really just a piece of paper. So that's why this is critical for to be taught to every classroom and our kids, because the left have taken over education is the problem. 6-year-olds are learning godless philosophy on no moral restraints on anything. Why? You can be clicking your heels, you become a man or a girl or a woman. I mean, I got a scientific word to describe that philosophy, and the word is nuts. So anyway, I'm just going to finish with what is the value of life? We live in a time where the value of human life is really insignificant. And your life and my life, you think about the value of everybody is infinite. And it starts with a poem that's called The Old Violin. It says, it was tattered and worn, and the old auctioneer thought it scarcely worth his while to waste much time on the old violin, but he held it up with a smile. What am I bid for this old violin? Who'll start the bidding for me? $1, $1, $1, $2, who'll give me $3? $3 once and $3 twice, $3 going for $3. But a gray-haired man in the back of the room came forward and picked up the bow. He wiped the dust off the old violin and tightened the loose strings and played a melody pure and sweet as Carol and Angel sings. Well, the music ceased, and the auctioneer, the voice that was quiet and low, said, what am I bid for this old violin, as he held it up with the bow. $1,000, 1,000, 2,000. Who'll give me three? 3,000 once and 3,000 twice, and going is gone, said he. Well, the people cheered, and some of them cried, we don't quite understand. What changed its worth? And came the reply, 'twas the touch of the master's hand. And many a man, with life out of tune, shattered and worn with sin, is auctioned cheap by the thoughtless crowd, much like the old violin. A mess of pottage, a glass of wine, a game that travels on. He's going once and going twice, and going and almost gone. But the master comes, and the foolish crowd never can quite understand the worth of a soul and the change that's wrought by the touch of the master's hand. Now, if anyone has anything better than that, I'd like to hear it. But we got people in office nowadays that are godless, that hate everything America stands for, that the enemy are Christians. And we got a war going on that people don't realize how bad it is. And young people, they said a democracy exists to the extent that enough people discover they can vote themselves economic benefits out of the public trough. Once enough people discover that, they only vote for politicians who promise them economic benefits. And that's the problem today. First lesson of economics, there's never enough resources to meet everyone's desire. The first lesson of politics is to ignore the first lesson of economics. Just promise everybody everything to get elected. It's impossible to deliver. Because, see, like Lord Action said, power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Man's greatest gift is his power of love. His greatest downfall is love of power. Who would think we'd have people in office 50 years and 100 years? And, you know, it's one, and Supreme Court justices. We've allowed secular humanist judges to rule this country. The number one legacy of a president is judges. So President Trump might not be the most pious Christian in the world, but God's ways aren't our ways. And he's done more for religious liberty than any president in my lifetime. And that's the bottom line. We've had the highest standard of living, the dream of the world. Trillions and trillions of dollars that our country's gained because of his expertise and knowledge of economics, and also his ability to surround himself with Christian leaders who are praying for him. And so our job, we say each one teach 10. And pretty soon you got 100 people, 500 people, all making this shining city on a hill. So thank you.